I still remember the sound of the zipper on our tent. That's such a small thing, but for some reason it stuck with me. The way it sounded in the dark, slow, careful, like whoever was touching it didn't want to wake us up. This happened when I was 24. My girlfriend at the time and I went camping at a small campground about 3 hours from where we lived. It wasn't some huge national park or anything, just a quiet wooded place with basic campsites, a dirt parking area, a few fire rings, and a narrow creek that ran behind the tent sites. We picked it because it was cheap and because the pictures online made it look peaceful. And honestly, during the day, it was. I remember we got there around 4 in the afternoon. The light was still warm, the trees were bright green, and there were only maybe 3 other cars in the lot. It felt safe, normal, almost boring. Our site was near the back, close to the creek. Across the water, there was another flat area that looked like an old unused campsite. There was a fire ring there, but it looked abandoned. No picnic table, no sign, no number marker. I remember joking that it looked like the discount campsite. My girlfriend laughed and said she liked ours better because at least ours didn't look like a crime scene. We set up the tent, made sandwiches, and started a small fire. Everything was completely normal until around sunset. That's when we noticed smoke coming from across the creek. At first, I thought someone had just shown up late and taken that old campsite. But when I looked closer, I couldn't see a tent. I couldn't see a car. I couldn't see anyone moving around. Just smoke. A thin grey line rising through the trees. I told myself, maybe the person was sitting low behind the fire ring, or maybe their tent was hidden behind some bushes. I didn't want to make a big deal out of nothing. That's something I think about a lot now. How badly you want strange things to be normal, because normal is easier. By the time it got fully dark, the fire across the creek was still going. No voices, no flashlight, no movement, just the orange glow between the trees. Around 10, we started getting ready to sleep. My girlfriend brushed her teeth by the picnic table while I put the food back in the car. I remember being annoyed because I had forgotten to bring a trash bag, so I had to use an old grocery bag from the trunk. That detail is stupid, but I remember it because while I was tying the bag shut, I heard someone cough. Not from our side of the creek, from the other side, a man's cough. Dry, close. I froze with the grocery bag in my hand. I looked across the creek. The fire was still burning, and for the first time, I saw someone sitting beside it. Just a dark shape, still, facing our campsite. I called quietly to my girlfriend and told her to come over. She asked what was wrong. I said, "There's someone over there." She looked. The figure didn't move. We both stood there for maybe 10 seconds. Then my girlfriend whispered, "Why is he facing us?" I didn't have an answer. I wanted to call out, but something about it felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just off. Like if I called out, I'd be acknowledging something I didn't want to be part of. So we went into the tent. I know that sounds dumb, but at the time, it felt like the safest thing to do. We got into our sleeping bags and tried to act normal. I remember my girlfriend whispering that maybe he was just drunk, or maybe he didn't realize he was staring in our direction. I agreed with her, but neither of us sounded convinced. For a while, nothing happened. Then we heard music, very faint, humming from across the creek. Not a song I recognized, more like an old radio playing somewhere far away. Static, then music, then static again. It played for maybe a minute, then it stopped, and after that we heard the man's voice. He said something, but we couldn't make it out. My girlfriend grabbed my arm. I whispered, "It's okay." But my voice sounded fake. Then he said it again. This time I understood him. He said, "Pretty tent." I felt my whole body go cold because our tent was dark green, and from across the creek in the dark with our lantern off He shouldn't have been able to see it clearly. My girlfriend whispered, "We should leave." I wanted to, but the car was maybe 70 yards away through the trees, and to get there, we'd have to unzip the tent, step out, cross the campsite, and walk away with our backs turned to him. So we stayed still. That was probably the longest hour of my life. The fire across the creek slowly died down. The insects got louder. Every little sound outside the tent made me stop breathing. Then, sometime after midnight, we heard splashing, slow splashing, someone stepping through the creek. My girlfriend started crying silently. I could feel her shaking beside me. I reached for the small camping knife I had in my backpack. It was one of those cheap folding knives, the kind you buy because it makes you feel prepared, even though, in that moment, it felt completely useless. The splashing stopped. Now the footsteps were on our side, wet shoes on leaves. They came closer, then stopped right outside our tent. I could see the lower part of a shadow through the fabric, 2 legs standing near the entrance. Nobody said anything. I remember staring at the zipper. I remember thinking, if it moves, I have to do something. But I didn't know what. Then the zipper moved, just a tiny bit, not opening all the way, just enough to make that small metallic sound. My girlfriend made this tiny sound in her throat, like she was trying not to scream. I shouted, "We have a gun!" We didn't, but I shouted it as hard as I could. Everything went silent. Then the man outside whispered, "No, you don't." That sentence still bothers me. Not because he knew we didn't have one. Maybe he guessed. Maybe he had watched us unpack. I don't know. But the confidence in his voice was worse than the words. A second later, the shadow moved away, slowly. The wet footsteps went back toward the creek. We waited until we heard splashing again. Then I grabbed our phones, wallets, and car keys. We didn't pack anything. We didn't even put on shoes properly. We just ran. I remember stepping on something sharp and not feeling it much later. We reached the car, locked the doors, and I started it with shaking hands. As we pulled out, my girlfriend looked back toward the campsite. She said, "He's there." I looked in the mirror. The man was standing beside our tent. Our lantern was on now. I don't know how. But the tent was glowing from the inside, and he was just standing in front of it, watching us drive away. We called the campground number the next morning. The owner went to check the site. Our tent had been cut open from the back. Our cooler was still there. Our bags were still there. Nothing valuable was taken, but on the picnic table, someone had placed the grocery bag of trash I had tied earlier. Inside it was a wet pair of socks, not ours. The owner said maybe it was a homeless person or someone living out in the woods. Maybe, but I still think about the fact that he knew we didn't have a gun. I think about him crossing the creek in the dark, and I think about that zipper moving slowly, like he wanted us awake for it. I haven't slept in a tent since, and every time I hear a zipper in a quiet room, even now, I remember exactly how it sounded that night. The weirdest thing about this story is that nothing felt dangerous at first. It felt annoying. That's what I remember. Not fear, annoyance. Because when strange things start small, your brain doesn't immediately think, "I'm in danger." It thinks, "Who moved my stuff?" This happened during a weekend camping trip with my older brother. We had both been busy for months, and we decided to do one of those basic no-service camping trips just to get away from work and phones. The campground was pretty remote, not completely wild, but remote enough that after the ranger station closed, you were basically on your own until morning. Our campsite was down a narrow dirt road, tucked between tall pines. I remember the ground was uneven, and we spent way too long trying to find a flat spot for the tent. My brother kept saying, "This is fine," and then lying down for 2 seconds and saying, "Nope, my spine is on a root." That's the kind of normal stupid detail I remember. We were in a good mood. A little before dark, we bought firewood from a self-serve shed near the entrance. We carried 2 bundles back to the site and stacked them next to the fire ring. Then we walked maybe 10 minutes down to the lake to take a few pictures before the sun disappeared. When we came back, one of the firewood bundles was gone. At first, we just stood there looking at the empty spot. My brother said, "Did you move it?" I said, "Why would I move firewood?" He looked around like maybe it had rolled away, which made no sense. There were no other campers close to us. The nearest occupied site was maybe 200 yards away through the trees. We both got irritated. Not scared, just irritated. I remember saying, if someone needed wood that badly, they could have asked. We still had 1 bundle, so we started the fire and tried to forget about it. But about an hour later, my brother stopped talking mid-sentence. He was looking past me. I turned around. The missing bundle of firewood was back, stacked neatly beside the fire ring, exactly where it had been before. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then my brother gave this awkward little laugh and said, "Okay, that's not funny." I looked towards the trees. Nothing. No flashlight, no footsteps, no voices, just dark woods. We tried to convince ourselves maybe we had somehow missed it earlier, but we both knew we hadn't, because we had stared directly at that empty spot. That was the first time the woods felt different. A little later we heard movement behind the tent. Not animal movement, human movement. The slow crunch of leaves under careful feet. My brother called out, "Hey, do you need something?" No answer. The footsteps stopped. Then a few seconds later, we heard them again. This time, farther left, like someone was moving around us in a wide circle. My brother stood up and grabbed the hatchet we were using for kindling. I picked up the flashlight. I remember how my thumb slipped on the rubber button because my hands had started sweating. I turned the beam into the trees. Nothing. Then the flashlight hit something bright. A piece of white paper pinned to a tree, maybe 20 feet away. I walked closer, but only a few steps. It was a receipt, our receipt, from the gas station where we had stopped earlier that day, the one I had thrown into the cup holder of my brother's truck. Someone had taken it from inside the truck and pinned it to the tree with a small knife. That was when annoyance turned into fear. My brother checked his pockets. He still had his keys. The truck had been locked, or at least we both remembered locking it. But the receipt had been inside. My brother whispered, "We are leaving." No argument from me. We didn't even put out the fire properly at first. We just threw water on it fast, grabbed our bags, and started shoving things into the truck. That's when we noticed the windshield. There was writing on it. Not carved, not marker, written with a finger through the dust. It said, "Too early." I remember staring at those words and feeling confused before I felt scared. Too early for what? Too early to leave? Too early in the night? Too early for whatever they had planned? My brother said, "Get in." I got into the passenger seat. He started the truck. The headlights lit up the dark road ahead of us, and standing in the middle of that road was a man. He was maybe 50 feet away, wearing a dark jacket and jeans, no flashlight, no backpack, no camping gear. He was just standing there, facing us. My brother honked. The man didn't move. My brother muttered, "Oh my God," and threw the truck into reverse. We backed up fast, almost hitting the picnic table. The man started walking toward us. Not running, walking. My brother turned the truck around between 2 trees. I remember branches scraping the sides so hard I thought they were going to break the mirror off. When we finally got pointed toward the exit, the man had stepped out of the road. He stood near the trees now. As we drove past, I looked at him. I wish I hadn't, because he smiled. And then he lifted one hand, not waving goodbye, more like showing us something. In his hand was a second firewood bundle, the one we had bought. The one that had disappeared and come back. We drove straight to the ranger station, but it was closed, so we kept driving until we had phone service and called the non-emergency police number. An officer met us near the main road. He followed us back to the campsite. By then, the man was gone. The receipt was still pinned to the tree, the writing was still on the windshield, and our tent had been moved. Not taken, moved. It was now set up about 20 feet deeper into the woods, behind the place where we had originally pitched it. That bothered the officer too. He said it looked like someone had dragged it while it was still assembled. Inside the tent, everything was exactly where we left it, except our sleeping bags had been unzipped and laid open, side by side, like someone had been preparing them. I don't know what that man wanted. I don't know if he was alone. I don't know how long he had watched us. But what still makes me feel sick is the timing. He could have taken our money. He could have stolen the truck. He could have just scared us off. But he didn't. He moved things, small things, firewood, a receipt, the tent, like he was testing how much we would ignore before we finally understood. And the truth is, we almost ignored too much. I know this is going to sound strange, but the part that scared me most wasn't the screaming. It was the way she acted before it happened. How normal she seemed, how polite, how tired. Because if someone looks completely insane from the beginning, you know to stay away. But if they seem like someone's mum or someone's wife or just a regular person having a bad night, you try to help. This happened at a small forest campground in early October. I went there alone. It was only supposed to be one night. I had been stressed from work, and I wanted one quiet evening where nobody needed anything from me. I remember stopping at a grocery store on the way and buying the most boring camping food possible: bread, peanut butter, apples, instant coffee, and a small bag of those cheap chocolate cookies. I didn't even eat them, but they were sitting on the passenger seat when I pulled into the campground. The place was almost empty. The woman at the registration booth gave me Site 9 and warned me that rain was coming later. She also said, "You'll probably have the whole back loop to yourself." At the time, that sounded perfect. Now, I hate that sentence. I drove to the back loop and passed only one other occupied campsite, Site 6. There was an old silver minivan parked there, and a woman sitting at the picnic table under a blue rain poncho. She looked up as I drove by and gave me a small wave. I waved back. Normal. Completely normal. I set up my tent at Site 9, made coffee on a small burner, and sat under the tarp while the rain started. For about an hour, it was exactly what I wanted. Quiet, cold, peaceful. Then the woman from Site 6 walked over. She stayed at the edge of my campsite and said, "Sorry to bother you." I remember she had this soft voice, not creepy, just tired. She asked if I had jumper cables. I said I didn't. She smiled and apologized again. Then she asked if I had seen a man walking around. That caught me off guard. I said, "No, what man?" She looked behind her toward the road, then back at me. She said, "My husband. He gets confused." I didn't know what to say. She looked maybe late 40s or early 50s. Wet hair stuck to her forehead. Her poncho was dripping onto her shoes. I asked if she wanted me to call someone. She said there was no service, which was true. Then she said, "If you see him, don't let him come near me." That changed everything. I asked if he was dangerous. She didn't answer directly. She just looked at the woods behind my tent and said, "He knows how to sound normal." I felt uncomfortable then, not terrified yet, just uncomfortable in that way where you realize you're alone with someone else's problem and you don't know how serious it is. She apologized again and walked back towards Site 6. I watched her go, and that's when I noticed something weird. There was no tent at her site, no camping gear, just the minivan. I told myself maybe she was sleeping in the van. People do that. It was raining. It made sense. For the next hour, I kept looking down the road towards Site 6. I could see the silver minivan through the trees. No movement, no lights, nothing. Then, around 9, I heard someone calling my name. I froze, because I hadn't told anyone there my name. Then, I realized it wasn't my name. It was just close enough that my brain tried to make it my name. A man's voice was calling something from the woods, softly, repeatedly. I couldn't make out the word. It might have been a name. It might have been, "Hey." It might have been nothing. But it was coming from behind my campsite, not from Site 6. I turned off my lantern. I don't know why, I just did. The campsite went dark, except for the dim grey rain light. Then I heard footsteps on the wet leaves, slow, heavy, behind the tent. I picked up my pocket knife. Again, completely useless probably, but I needed something in my hand. The footsteps stopped. Then the man's voice said, "Sir?" Very polite, very calm. "I'm sorry to bother you." I didn't answer. He said, "My wife came through here. She gets confused." I felt my stomach turn. Same words, almost. Same story, reversed. He was maybe 10 feet behind my tent, just outside the trees. I couldn't see him. He said, "She might have told you things. She does that." Still calm, still polite. Then he said, "She knows how to sound normal." I stopped breathing, because that was almost exactly what she had said about him. I didn't know who to believe, and that was the worst part. There was a woman at Site 6 who seemed scared. There was a man in the woods who seemed calm, and I was alone in the rain with no service. I said loudly, "I'm calling the ranger." He didn't respond. Then he laughed once, not loud, just one small laugh through his nose. Then the footsteps moved away. I waited maybe 5 minutes. Then I grabbed my keys and ran to my car. As I drove past Site 6, I slowed down. The minivan was still there. The driver's side door was open. The interior light was on. The woman was sitting in the driver's seat, completely still. For 1 second, I thought she was hurt. Then she turned her head and looked at me, and she smiled. Not relieved, not scared, smiled. Then someone stood up from behind the minivan, a man. He had been crouching there, right beside the rear tire. I hit the gas so hard the car fishtailed on the wet gravel. I didn't stop until I reached the registration booth near the entrance. It was closed, but there was a small emergency number posted on the window. I called it from the landline outside. The ranger showed up 20 minutes later with a sheriff's deputy. Then they went back to Site 6. The minivan was gone. My tent was still at Site 9. My tarp was still up. My coffee cup was still on the table, but the bag of chocolate cookies from my car was sitting in the middle of the picnic table. I had never taken it out of the car. The deputy asked if I was sure. I was sure. I remember those cookies on the passenger seat because I had moved them twice while looking for my flashlight. Someone had opened my car while I was distracted, or while I was hiding, or maybe while I was talking to one of them. I don't know. They never found the woman or the man. The campground owner said Site 6 hadn't been rented that night. No silver minivan was registered. No one had checked in under their description. I still don't know what they were doing. Maybe they were trying to get me out of my campsite. Maybe they wanted to walk over to the van. Maybe they were waiting to see which one of them I trusted. But what bothers me most is that both of them sounded believable. Both of them sounded scared in their own way. And I think that was the point. Because out there, alone in the rain, with nobody around, I almost helped.